Good evening and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are on day 100, and I'm at least going to begin a story called The Third Wish. Now, once there was a man who was driving home, and his name was Mr. Conway. And as Mr. Conway was driving home, windows open, beautiful summer day, close to this beautiful river near his home, it actually ran past his, property where his home was. As he's driving along the road, he hears this sound like something thrashing in the bushes, and also hears a voice that is not quite human, but similar, and obviously in distress. So he pulls his car off to the side of the road, and he gets out, and he goes down to the river where this thrashing is taking place. And in a briar patch with vines growing up from the briars that then are reaching up into the branches of a tree, he sees a rather large swan that's struggling to get itself free. And so he very carefully enters into this thicket and helps very carefully to extract this swan from its entanglement. Now, as he does so, the swan begins to swing its head around. And if you've ever dealt with a large bird like that has a long neck, they're able to swing their heads about in so many different directions. And the swan could easily peck at Mr. Conway with its beak. Mr. Conway avoided that beak as best he could, and eventually he grabbed hold of the neck close behind the head as he was finally able to extract the swan from out of this mess that it was in. Carefully, with the swan tucked under its arm and the head of the swan kept secure so that it couldn't swing around and hit him, he carried the swan to the river, and he carefully laid the swan upon the water. And the swan immediately kicked out away from the bank a little ways and began to preen its feathers and to bring water up over its back and to clean itself and to put all of its feathers back in place. I mean, imagine having a body covered with feathers. You got to take good care of your feathers, because typically birds, they only get a new set of feathers once or twice a year in some cases. So you got to take good care of your feathers and keep them all in place and keep all the little filaments of the feather, neatly against the one next to it so they adhere and so wind doesn't pass through when you're flying. So the swan busily got started doing that. Mr. Conway stood on the bank and just watched. Now the swan looked a little agitated, it was like not very happy about what had happened to it. And it swung around and made its way back to Mr. Conway. Mr. Conway sort of wondered if the swan was going to thank him for what he did in some way, or he didn't know. But to his great surprise, the swan came right up onto the bank next to him, and with a sound that was kind of like a poof and a pop all in one, the swan changed into a man that was all clothed in green, smaller than a human, but still a man in every way. And it turned out that the swan that had been entangled was the king of that part of the forest. And he turned to Mr. Conway and said, I see you're expecting a reward for what you've done. And Mr. Conway had gained his composure again and looked now at the green man and said, well, yes, of course, but no more or less than 3 wishes. Ah, said the little green man, 3 wishes, is it? You know your rewards quite well. 3 wishes it will be then. But mind you, you don't use your 3rd wish to undo the first 2. And with that, there was another poof and a pop, and 3 leaves the green man threw up into the air in front of Mr. Conway. Now, Mr. Conway knew that those 3 leaves represented the 3 wishes that he was being given. He picked 3 leaves up off the ground and carried them back to his car. He tucked them in his pocket and he made his way home, which was not very far away. Well, when he got home, he sat for a little bit at his table and wondered, what was it that he could wish for? The truth was he had really everything that he needed and wanted. He lacked for nothing. And so, what was it that a wish could bring? And then he thought about it. He thought, I am a little bit lonely, and it would certainly be nice to have some comfort, some companionship as I grow older into my old age. It'd be nice to have a wife. Now, he thought very carefully because the words of the little green king of the forest rung in his ears. Don't spend your last wish undoing your first 2. He took that first leaf, and as he did so, he let it drop out the window of his house, and he wished, let me have a wife as beautiful as the forest. A wife as beautiful as the forest. Outside his window, in the direction of the river, he heard a tumultuous sound, a crashing and a banging, but it wasn't even like that. It was a sound unlike he'd ever heard, almost like kind of a quaking of one world and another. He went to sleep. When he rose up in the morning, he made his way down his stairs to his kitchen. He made himself just a cup of warm water. After having had that, he went out to greet the day and the chores that he had to do, milking the cow, taking care of his hens, which laid eggs for him, tending the bees, tending his garden, tending his fruit trees. But as he opened the door, there, walking toward him from the direction of the river, was a beautiful woman, more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen. She had dark brown hair, a slender body, but definitely not skinny, strong and slender, I would say, and eyes that, well, they were the color of, well, like turquoisey green water. And she walked straight toward him, and he said, "Are you the wife I wished for?" And she returned and said, "Yes, I am, and my name is Lieta." "Ah, how lovely he said. Indeed, she said. Well, that very day, the two of them went down to the church and had the pastor there marry them. And husband and wife they became. Now, Lieta, she did so many helpful things there for Mr. Conway. Tending the chickens, helping with eggs, making delicious food for her husband, darning the socks, milking the cow, tending the garden as it had never been tended before, and making his home beautiful in a way that he had never been able to, keeping it cleaner than he had ever thought that it could be. They had a beautiful life together. There were times, though, that Mr. Conway would see in his wife a faraway look, as if she was thinking about something. He knew not what it was. But as the days passed, this faraway look seemed to increase. And there were days when he would come in from working and she would not be there. She would return shortly after he had entered the house, and she would always come from the direction of the river. Well, on one occasion, when Mr. Conway was taking care of one thing and another, as is the case when you have land and fruit trees and gardens and cows and chickens and honeybees and all kinds of things like that, water systems to take care of. And, well, he had to do something down by the river. And he went down to the river and was very surprised to see that there, on the trail, close to his home, along the bank there, was Lieta. And with her was a swan. And the swan had its head against the side of her face. And he saw that his lovely wife was crying. And he did not know quite what he should do. And when he looked more closely, he saw that there were tears dropping from the eyes of the swan as well. Now he cared for his wife deeply. So he looked at her and he went down to her and he said, "My love, what is this?" We'll leave the story there and find out what happens tomorrow. Thanks for joining.